It's time for App Stories. I am here with Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
I'm there in Italy compared to your here being in America.
Yeah,
but
I guess
yes.
I guess I'm not really here with you. I'm here with you in spirit.
I mean,
although
you're here
not
on Skype as well. So
Yes, we're here on Skype.
yes.
I am John Voorhees. I'm the
You
managing editor of MacStories.net. Just thought I wanted to remind everybody of that.
No,
And
it's cool. It's cool. It's good to tell people. You know,
it's a
just
cool job. It's a cool job. I'm very happy. I'm very pleased with my title. And our episode today is brought to you by Instabug. We've got a couple of different topics, Federico, to talk about. And before we get to the main one, I wanted to dig in a little bit about some experiments you've been running with shortcuts. It's not unusual. Talk about, leaning into your persona as we did during the pre-show.
What Federico has done is a recurring topic on all the podcasts that I'm on. So
Yes.
Yeah.
And question number 1, what have you done? Question number 2, does it involve base 64?
Okay. Answer number 2, no, it doesn't. Not this time. Question number 1. So for the past couple of weeks, I've been writing in Club Mac Stories, in Mac Stories Weekly, about my experiments with shortcuts. I mean, sure, but
Right.
It's different this time. So I have sort of rediscovered an old topic that I last wrote about 3 years ago in 2019, in the before times, 2019, spring 2019, good times. The topic was the fact that shortcuts in the Shortcuts app, you're used to seeing them as these visual blocks of actions, right? And you use the visual editor with drag and drop. I mean, that's what workflow was. That's what Shortcuts still is. Obviously, under the hood, these shortcuts must be code, right? It's all code somewhere.
Right.
But the thing is, this code in this Apple app, you can actually see for yourself, because shortcuts are nothing but a visual representation of some XML syntax. XML is let's say, for the sake of simplification, like a version of HTML. It's got the same structure. You got these opening tags and these closing tags, and you have the keys and the values. And all this code you can see for yourself. The method that I used in 2019 that I slightly updated for 2022 involves taking a shortcut from your library. You can do this because Apple provides you an action to do this. It's called Get My Shortcuts. And once you select a shortcut, if you change its file name, or essentially if you extract from it a specific file type, you can take a look at the code. Now, the file type is the plist, the property list. You may have seen this on macOS. It's a way, usually plist files are usually a way for apps to store preferences, right? In this case, if you convert the shortcut to a plist, you can then get the XML out of it. Now, what's new in iOS and iPadOS 15 and macOS Monterey is that there's also a JSON representation of shortcuts. JSON is maybe slightly more user-friendly. You may be used to seeing JSON in My Shortcuts because it's the format you use, for example, when you talk to web APIs in Shortcuts. And it's also more convenient than XML. XML is kind of ugly to look at. And there are utilities on iOS like the excellent JSON app by Simon Stovring that lets you inspect all the JSON structure of your shortcuts. Now, that I wrote about 2 weeks ago. Last Friday, I went one step beyond, which was, okay, so I can take a look at the XML code of a shortcut. That's cool. And we can extract data out of it. That was the whole reason for doing this was that I wanted to extract without user interaction. So without having to touch anything, I wanted to extract the contents of the first action of a shortcut. But then I started wondering, well, if I have the code, and if I learn the code, can I actually inject some code into a shortcut and make an app and make a modified version of the shortcut, save it, and re-add it back to the Shortcuts app as a modified shortcut? So my question was, can I take this code, put in some extra code, and make it a new shortcut?
Okay.
And yes, you can, because all you need to do is, if you know where to put the code, you just save the shortcut as, say, musicbot.shortcut. That's the file extension. and you save it to the Finder or you save it to the Files app, and you have a shortcut. Now, in 2019, before iOS 15 for sure, you could double-click that shortcut and you would add it back to the Shortcuts app, and it would just work. That technique was popular if you wanted to build a backup workflow, if you wanted to build a backup system to locally back up all of your shortcuts. Now, that technique broke with iOS 15 and iPadOS 15 and macOS Monterey because Apple last September introduced a new security protocol for shortcuts where all these shortcut files that you can now also export from the Shortcuts app itself, they need to be signed with a certificate that is provided by Apple and that is tied to your iCloud account. If you have an unsigned .shortcut file and you try to double-click it, the Shortcuts app will give you an error and it will say, unsigned shortcuts are not supported anymore. So I was back to square one and I was like, oh, that's too bad. I figured out the whole system and I can export these .shortcut files and do so with my system for XML code, but they don't work because I couldn't figure out how to replicate the signing process. You see, when you share a shortcut as a file from the Shortcuts app using the Apple system, meaning you use the share sheet and you say, I want to save the shortcut as a file, the share sheet has a built-in signing process that literally signs the shortcut with your iCloud account so that Apple can then verify that file and say, okay, yeah, this is a signed shortcut. We can verify the certificate on our servers. It's fine if you want to add this shortcut back to your library.
I think that explains why it takes a little while to generate an iCloud link.
Yes.
There's a little bit, that spinner takes a good, 10 seconds maybe.
Exactly. And the same is when you share from the share sheet a shortcut as a file. There's that signing step in between that needs to put in a certificate into the signed shortcut. In fact, if you share a shortcut from the Shortcuts app as a file, and again, you can do this like officially from the share sheet. You tap on the options button, and there's a menu that says iCloud link or file. If you save that file, and if you try to get the XML out of that file, you know what you're gonna get, John?
What?
A bunch of gibberish text.
Oh, really?
Because the certificate is encrypted, and so you cannot get anything that makes sense out of it. So I was very sad about this, that I had this whole system and I was just almost there. But then this faint memory came back to me. It was like, I had a vision and I could visualize in my mind's eye this slide from WWDC 2021 that said, Shortcuts, macOS, and signing. I remember that Apple said something about signing shortcuts on macOS. And I asked you, do you remember anything about signing shortcuts yourself on macOS Monterey? And the moment I asked you the question and you replied, I was already finding the solution on Google. Yeah. There was a session at WWDC 2021 that mentioned that on macOS Monterey, you can use the Shortcuts command line utility, so the Shortcuts command in the terminal, to sign shortcuts and generate a valid iCloud-based certificate that lets you sign a shortcut file yourself without having to use the share sheet.
You know what's interesting about this, Federico, is that was mentioned during that session, and then there was almost nothing written about it.
No.
For weeks and weeks, months afterwards. And I think it's because, if I remember correctly, the early betas didn't have all of the command line commands in place, and this was one of the ones that didn't exist. So the only place that reference existed was in that one slide, in that one presentation, because I remember looking for it and also wondering, why would you why would you want to sign your shortcuts in the terminal? And so there's very little about this out there.
Yep. And I can tell you there's not a ton of documentation in the terminal either.
No.
But why? So that's a good question. Why would you do this? There's a couple of reasons. The first one is, and I think the most obvious one is, years ago, you created a local backup of your shortcuts, and now those shortcuts cannot be imported in the Shortcuts app anymore.
Right.
Now Apple lets you sign them again. Even if you have an old shortcut from 3 years ago, a .shortcut file, that cannot be imported anymore, now you can sign it in the terminal and you can bring it back to life in the Shortcuts app. But the second reason is maybe Apple knows that folks like us that like to tinker, especially on macOS, where you get to you can do this stuff on macOS, they're giving us a way to do these kinds of experiments. So in Mac Stories Weekly, issue 308, you will find in the Shortcuts Corner section my shortcut called, it's a very, very hackery kind of name, Shortcut Injector.
Nice.
So the Shortcut Injector, it's a proof of concept, but it works, and I'm sharing it so that other people can build stuff with it. It lets you take an existing shortcut. It injects an action at the top of it as a test, right? It lets you inject a comment action at the top of it. But the most important part is it saves this modified version of the shortcut, signs the shortcut for you, and imports it back into the Shortcuts app in one single flow. All it takes is one click. So I figured out how to do the signing automatically inside Shortcuts on macOS Monterey and macOS only, because this stuff you cannot do on iOS and iPadOS, without having to use the terminal yourself. So you don't even see the command. You don't even see the shell that does this stuff behind the scenes. So go check it out. You can download the shortcut. You can start playing around with it yourself. And like I said, I'm sharing it because I want to see what people do with this now. Because now that we have an easy system for you to take a shortcut, take the code of a shortcut, inject new code into a shortcut and sign it, I think you could potentially do some really interesting things with it. Like, I don't know, maybe you could say, take an entire folder of shortcuts, like 20 shortcuts, and convert them all at once into a single shortcut that has a menu that says run one of these actions. Yeah. So like a full, like I could see someone come up with like a folder to shortcut converter utility.
Yeah, I wonder if you could do some kind of batch processing, for instance, with things like adding share sheet support to 10 shortcuts at one time. You could if you want. If you don't want to click all those buttons yourself. And again, provided that you know the code. But there are utilities out there. There are websites out there that have documented the XML code of a shortcut. There are utilities like Jellycuts. Like Jellycuts is a utility that lets you write shortcuts as code, right? And lets you save those files. So this syntax is out there. It's been documented by other folks. And I'm sharing this signing method because I think it's going to simplify this process a lot. So effectively, I have created a shortcut to make other shortcuts, right? It's very meta, but it's a shortcut generation tool that runs in Shortcuts itself. Yeah, I love this idea, and I love that it's out there because, yes, you're right. I think a lot of people it'll give people ideas and inspiration for coming up with ways to take advantage of it. Yeah, sometimes you just want to make something cool and share it with the world and see what happens, you know? Yeah, exactly. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Instabug. Building mobile apps presents some challenges. Bugs, crashes, and performance issues can be a nightmare for developers. But what if you could not only detect these issues, but also get a holistic understanding of the quality of your app from your user's point of view? Instabug's lightweight SDK grabs all of the insights you need to build top quality apps through comprehensive bug and crash reports, performance monitoring, and real-time user feedback, all in a single SDK. With Instabug, you can continuously monitor and measure the performance of your app as perceived by the users. Empower your users to report issues and ask questions seamlessly from right inside your app. Get all of the information you need about bugs, crashes, and other issues, and get them fixed in record time, all with a focus on privacy and security. On top of all that, you don't need to worry about the hassle of switching to a new tool. It only takes a minute to integrate Instabug into your app, and it fits right within your workflow, with support for Jira, Slack, Trello, GitHub, Zendesk, and over 10 other popular tools. Join over 25,000 top mobile developers around the world who use Instabug to ship high-quality apps. go to try.instabug.com/appstories so they know you came from the show. Again, that URL to check out this great service is try.instabug.com/appstories. Our thanks to Instabug for their support of the show. All right, Federico, let's move on to the main event for this episode, which is, I've got a really good SEO title for you. It's 10 innovations that Apple should adopt from third-party apps. Okay,
we're doing clickbait now. Okay,
we are doing clickbait. But how do you have clickbait on a podcast? I don't know. I mean,
with the title.
All right.
Well, but it's missing an adjective. I think 10 genius innovations Apple should not adopt. Apple should steal from third-party apps. Or maybe if we were a YouTube channel, we would do like the thumbnail with like the two of us and a shocked face and like the shortcuts icon in the middle. And the title would be like, Apple should steal, and steal would be uppercase, these features from apps.
And there would be an Apple logo behind bars. Right? Because they've stolen all the ideas.
Or it would be like Tim Cook, but it's dressed like the Hamburger, maybe.
Oh, the Hamburger, yes. Oh, gosh. Oh, Federico. Yeah, we aren't talking about stealing things from third-party apps.
No,
We're talking about conceptual things that we think that Apple might be working on, and that I think that they could benefit from taking a hard look at third-party apps, which is something that they do all the time. And so to get ready for this, one of the things that I did is I looked at two things. I looked at our Mac Stories Selects Awards, because those are some of the best apps out there right now. And I also looked at the apps that Apple picked as their apps of the year, because I think if you go back through the history of those, there are definitely themes there. Some of the themes are PR themes. They're things that PR is kind of interested in and wants to, ideas that they want to spread. But I think there's also business ideas in there, that things that Apple is considering and interested in. And so my first two are along the lines of those. Two of the winners this year were is this DAZN? Dazn?
I told you how to pronounce this. Come on.
I don't remember. What was it?
Okay, look at this. What word does it remind you of?
Dazn?
Almost there. What could it be?
No.
DAZN.
Oh, DAZN, right.
You're in the zone. Right?
Oh, yes. No, I'm not hip. I'm not hip enough for this title. This is an app that you told me is a terrible app too, because it's a
terrible app, but it's very popular.
It's very popular. It's on the Apple TV. I think it won for the Apple TV version, which, it's an app that for watching sports, and it's very big with football, European football, soccer for Americans.
Yeah.
And to me, this app shows an interest by Apple in getting into live sports with the Apple TV and TV Plus. And now sports are baked into the Apple TV already, but there's been a lot of talk about Apple trying to get into professional sports leagues and actually streaming these games. And so I think that that's part of why this particular app won an award, because despite the fact that, as you have said, it has this, what is it? It tends to freeze, or the stream just stops when there's a popular game on. The thing is that it does a really nice job, other than that, of creating reminders for people, letting you watch multiple matches at a time, really highlighting what's coming up and what's going on with various sports. And I think this is kind of this type of UI that Apple would be likely to adopt if it does get deeper into professional sports, because it's just from a visual standpoint and a design standpoint, the app does do a very nice job of organizing lots of information about a lot of different teams and matches going on, and makes it easy to browse through those things. So that's one that I think I could see Apple doing.
Okay. So my first pick is about reminders. It's something that we mentioned before. The feature is taken from Good Task, and it's real smart lists in reminders. We talked about this on App Stories before. Apple is now doing custom, like user-made smart lists in reminders as of iOS 15 and all the other OSs. But those smart lists are very underpowered, and there aren't really that many options. You can filter, there are some date filters, you can filter by tag, but really and by priority, but really that's about it. And whereas what I would like to see is much more granularity when it comes to filtering reminders based on multiple criteria and making a smart list out of those criteria. I would like to see filters for lists. I would like to see filters for, combining dates and priorities together. Like I would like to have like support for filtering reminders that have links attached, or reminders that have images attached, or reminders that contain a specific word in the title, or maybe a specific word in the notes field of reminder. All of the, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the filtering criteria that you have in Good Task, right? That is entirely based on reminders, so it's technically possible. I would like to see Apple do an official system for this. They have smart lists and reminders now. It's just a matter of adopting all of these other filtering options that are just not there at the moment.
That's a good one. That's a good one. All right. I'm not sure about my next pick. I'm not sure whether this is wish casting on my part, or I'm not really not sure what it is, but I would like to see one of the apps that won an award for best apps this past year was LumaFusion, which is an excellent video editing app that works on the iPad. Apple is rumored to be working on a new iPad Pro. The time is right for some Pro apps on the iPad Pro.
Oh yeah.
So I'd like to think that this is a sign that Apple is interested in Pro apps on the iPad, and that Final Cut will come to the iPad. The other interpretation, of course, is they are happy with that LumaFusion exists and don't feel the need to port their own apps over to the iPad. But I'm going to be optimistic about this and hope that we'll see some Pro apps like Final Cut on the iPad in 2022, and that the award given to LumaFusion was an indication of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. So this is a long time coming. So I would love to see that. My next pick is about podcasts, and it's about a feature that I would like Apple to adopt from Overcast, audio effects. Now, before you start saying, no, Apple will never do audio effects, there's precedent for this.
Yes, there is.
So again, this is something that I have mentioned on Mac Stories in my iOS reviews before. I've mentioned it on App Stories before. This is the official time to mention it again in this list. Apple has done audio effects, trim silence, skip silence, I guess it's called, and voice boost, basically. It's called enhance audio. They have done it already in voice memos. Now,
yes, of all places,
Voice Memos has grown to be a surprisingly capable app on all platforms. It's powered by Mac Catalyst on macOS. It's brand new on iPad, where you have a sidebar, you have support for folders, you have iCloud Drive into iCloud Sync, I guess. And what you can do is you can also enhance the quality of your recordings by tapping on a magic wand icon that boosts the audio, basically. And last year or 2 years ago, I don't remember if it was iOS 14 or 15, they added an option to skip silence. It's basically where you're used to seeing in Overcast and all the other podcast apps that copied Overcast after. They are doing this in voice memos. They let you trim silence and make the audio better. Now, these two features, these exact two buttons, I would love to see in podcasts as well.
Definitely.
Let me enhance the quality of the audio and let me not skip the ads. Let me trim the silence. These are features that are expected in podcast clients at this point. Apple has been experimenting with this for the past few years in voice memos. It's time to bring them over to podcasts where they really belong.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. All right, for my next pick, I'm going to go to one of our Mac Stories Selects winners, which is Better Touch Tool, because Better Touch Tool is an excellent example of all sorts of things that should be in the Shortcuts app but aren't on the Mac. So one of those is shortcuts on a schedule. You can do that using the Better Touch Tool shortcut actions, but you can't do it at least with the built-in actions that are in the Shortcuts app itself. Another one that I'd like to see is the ability to invoke keyboard shortcuts as an action in Shortcuts for Mac. Again, that's something that Better Touch Tool allows, but you can't do it with the built-in actions. Finally, I'd also like to see some basic UI building blocks built into shortcuts on all platforms so that you can create UI. Now, you can do this in Better Touch Tool using basically HTML to create buttons and things. It's not like native UI. It's not as flexible as that, but you can do it. And I'd like to see Apple take it a step further and use some of their actual, their own UI elements.
Yeah, I agree. I'm pretty sure I wished for more UI building blocks back in the workflow days. Like Editorial used to do this stuff years ago, like in 2013, almost 10 years ago. It used to let you build a custom UI. So yeah. My next app is Craft. I think Apple loves Craft. They gave it an award. They really love this app, and we all do. It's very elegant, it's very polished, and it's growing. But I think Apple should also look at it and adopt a lot of things from it in the Notes app. But I want to mention two features specifically. The first one is linking. I think backlinking and having internal links to other notes has become a staple of the modern generation of note-taking apps at this point. Every modern note-taking app lets you refer to other notes via an internal link. Craft does it. Notion does it. Obsidian does it. Agenda does it.
Bear and Drafts.
Bear does it. Like Drafts does it now. Internal linking is a feature that is expected at this point. I want to be able to just quickly refer to another note in the Notes app by having an internal link to that note. But to that effect, I also feel like something that Craft does really well is giving you tools to structure your note. And I don't mean like the headings and the sections and the lists. In Craft, what you can do is you can have pages nested within your notes. So you can effectively have navigation built into a note. You can start a note, you can start typing in a note, and then you can start writing a section. But then maybe you realize, I don't need to see this section in the main body text. This can be a page of this note. And so you turn it into a page, and what you got is a button that when you click it, it takes you to that page. So more structure, like more page structuring tools should also be built into notes. And Apple could do a good job here, right? They could do a nice job at abstracting the complexity of something like Obsidian and be more like Craft, where you can quickly refer to another note and you can quickly embed basically sub-notes within a parent note, if you will. That's something that Craft does really well. I would love to see Apple take a stab at this in Notes in iOS 16.
Yeah, I'd really like to see that as well. My next app is Yoink. And I don't really want Apple to rebuild or remake Yoink itself. But the idea here is that I feel like all the technologies are in place for something that's kind of a combination clipboard manager shelf app. And I think the time to make this app or this feature of the OS is now, because we've got universal control. And we talked about this a little bit last week in the pre-show for App Stories Plus, because you've got handoff, you've got the universal clipboard, you've got the ability to move from one system to the other. And all those things are there, but they're kind of invisible. And I think especially now that you've got different UI paradigms that you can kind of move between fluidly, going from the iPad to the Mac and back again, that it would be useful to have the ability to grab a bunch of data from one system by copying it, having it show up in either a clipboard or a shelf type system, and then have it be readily available on the Mac and vice versa. And I'm thinking about this in the context of something like Quick Note, where Apple created like a hot corner on the Mac to get the Quick Note really quickly. And you can you can summon it very quickly on the iPad as well. I feel like that kind of UI may be tied to Notes, but really more likely, I think something just tied to the OS itself that's usable across the system in a bunch of different apps would be really nice.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. All right. I want to mention Marvis here. Obviously,
good.
Marvis, it's the powerful and really excellent Apple Music client for iPhone and iPad. I've been using Marvis instead of the music app to browse my music, to discover albums that I want to revisit. I wrote about it over the past couple of months in Mac Stories Weekly and on Mac Stories. There's something very specific that I would like Apple to copy from Marvis. Actually, two things. One is, again, smart sections, right? Marvis lets you put together these smart sections based on filtering criteria that allow you to filter out specific parts of your music library. So basically, I'm wishing for smart playlists, right, in the music app, done with the same kind of filters that you can have in Marvis. Let me put together a smart playlist, which is not this wild innovation. I mean, iTunes and then the music app on desktop have had this feature for decades, really. Like, you can put together a smart playlist that filters by any kind of filter you want. Like, let me put together a smart playlist that filters my top albums from 2021, for example. Like that kind of stuff. Marvis does an excellent job at it. I would love to see that feature in the music app as well. And the second thing is more like a broader sort of aspect of the music experience, which is customization. I'm really not a fan of the Listen Now page of Apple Music, the default page of the music app. I would love to customize it and turn off sections I don't care about, or rearrange the placement of those sections, or maybe even the size of those sections. Like the top carousel view on iPhone in the Listen Now page with the giant recommendations, like it takes over the screen.
It does.
I want to keep it, but let me make it smaller. So have some visual customization built in so that the Listen Now page can become much more personal for folks like me who love this kind of stuff and really want to spend time in the music app, not just to listen, but to browse the library. So let me personalize the Listen Now page. Let me turn off sections I don't want to see. Let me make some sections the top ones, maybe, or stuff like that. I think it's time to have more flexibility in music in general, and this customization will really help, I think.
Yeah, it really would. And I think Apple's done a lot more with customization recently, and it's time for that stuff to come to the music app. I mean, it's it really hasn't changed a whole lot in the last couple of years. All right, I'm going to close out my list with a couple of concepts from Bartender, another Mac Stories Select award winner.
Oh, I have a Mac app as well as my last one. Okay.
Oh, nice. Well, Bartender, the thing that I love about Bartender is what you were talking about in the context of music. It lets you customize your menu bar and put things where you want them in the order that makes sense to the way you happen to work. And I'd like to see that come not to the menu bar itself from Apple, but to the control center. The control center on the Mac is kind of a shadow of what is available on iOS and iPadOS. There are a lot fewer options and tiles in there. And I'd really love to see third-party apps be able to create extensions that go in there, and you could add those as well. Especially with laptops that have notches now, there is less room and a need to manage the space more carefully on your laptops. And so building some of those concepts into the control center, I think, would be a good place to go. Another one I'd like to see is the addition of being able to create keyboard shortcuts for those menu bar items. Now, some apps have that by default built into them, but you can assign your own keyboard shortcuts to actions in the file menu by going to the system preferences. I'd like to be able to do that for menu bar items too, to activate them, because Bartender lets you do that in the most recent update. It lets you go in and assign keyboard shortcuts to particular items up there so that when you hit that keyboard shortcut, it activates, and whatever UI there happens to be just appears. I'd love to see Apple do something similar to that.
My last pick is also a Mac app, and it's about Raycast. We've been, I believe you're going to write about Raycast at some point.
I am, when I find enough time to actually put the words on paper, yes.
Yeah, so we've been playing around with Raycast, which is a Spotlight alternative on the Mac, right? It's an app in the same vein of Alfred, Launchbar, and Spotlight these these utilities that let you find stuff on your Mac and launch apps or files very quickly. Now, what I like about Raycast that I would also love to see in Spotlight is to be able to get more things done inside Spotlight itself, to have more interactivity with Spotlight. Let me just give you 2 examples. In Raycast, without leaving Raycast at all, I can see my schedule from the calendar app, and I can see my to-do list from reminders. I can manually type in a command to view those items, to view those UIs inside Raycast, or I can assign them a hotkey so that when I press Option R on my Mac, for example, I'm doing it right now, I press Option R and Raycast shows me my upcoming view from reminders. And those reminders I can highlight and I can hit return to mark them as done, or I can even inspect them and see more details for them. Like maybe I can set a priority, I can set a due date, and I don't have to leave Raycast at all. And same with the calendar. So these kinds of integrations, right? They are exactly the kind of stuff that Apple loves. Like communicating with a native built-in app, allowing you to get more things done. So maybe what I'm asking for is something like, I don't know, let's call them Spotlight extensions, maybe, that allow you to see results from apps inside Spotlight and perform actions contextually. So maybe slightly moving away from what Spotlight is at the moment, which is you can just launch things, and instead let me find things, and if I want, let me open them, but also let me take actions on those contextually within Spotlight. And I think Alfred and other launchers, they do this, but I think Raycast is the most intuitive take on this functionality that I've seen to date.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I've been using Raycast quite a bit and really, really have enjoyed it. I think it's a really nice approach to that. All right, Federico, I think that's it for this episode of App Stories. I want to thank our sponsor again, and that is Instabug. I also want to thank everybody for listening. Thanks for showing up and listening to the show every week. And if you're a subscriber of App Stories Plus, thank you too. And if you're not, you can go to appstories.plus to learn all about what we offer, which is extra content delivered early and ad-free. You can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. Federico is on Twitter and Instagram, where he's at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.